The front is on fire. A catastrophe for the occupiers on the front line. The war is reaching a new level of panic for Russia. Everything is being decided here and now. The pace of the offensive has slowed. Near Pokrovsk, the enemy drowned in their own blood. The world's second army, clowns and sheep. Fiery details from the front lines. Watch right now.
The Russian army is loosening its grip. The offensive of the occupying forces in the Pokrovsk direction has slowed down somewhat. This is stated in the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War. However, analysts emphasize that this situation is temporary. Right now, the enemy is actively transferring reserves and concentrating forces on this section of the front. And very soon, assaults and attacks may resume with renewed force.
At least somewhere. Up to half of the enemy's main forces are concentrated right here, the enemy's efforts. Even though it is no less difficult in other directions. In
recent days, the Russians have also made gains in the area of Mirnorad, east of Pokrovsk. Russian military bloggers are talking about the capture of western Rovne and most of Krasny Lyman. There is evidence that the Russians are breaking through, advancing toward the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya highway in eastern Pokrovsk. However, our defenders are holding their positions.
the balance of forces is changing because the enemy is being crushed there. Overall, the main task of Ukraine's defense forces is to inflict maximum damage on the armies advancing toward Pokrovsk.
According to some military observers, part of the Pokrovsk area has become a so-called gray zone, with control shifting back and forth.
It's more like a vinaigrette, if you will. Here it's red, here it's black, here it's white. And the situation there changes every hour. But the trend remains the same. When the forces of the Second Army approached, they were unable to advance into the city from the south and southwest. They waited for the 51st Army to encircle the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration from the north. But then the 51st Army decided to bite off more than it could chew.
So now the occupiers are not trying to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk itself. The enemy wants to break through the city to its northern outskirts. Serhiy Okishev, 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. Russian troops are somewhat slowing down their offensive operations in the Pokrovsk direction, waiting for reinforcements and trying to establish defenses and expand logistics to southern Pokrovsk. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there have been at least 73 Russian assaults in the Pokrovsk direction over the past day. At this very moment, fighting is taking place near Vladimirovka, Fedorovka, Nekonorovka, Krasny Liman, Orekhovo, and Filial. Unable to boast of any other achievements, the soldiers of the Kremlin's army resort to their favorite tactic, terror. For example, Russian drone operators have repeatedly tried to destroy the Ukrainian flag in Kramatorsk. In other words, to spite the Ukrainian armed forces in any way they can. But our flag turned out to be much quicker than yet another Russian drone operator. As a result, the frustrated occupier, having missed, simply crashed his FPV drone into the ground. His FPV. After watching videos like this, you can't help but wonder what kind of idiots are working there. The answer, just the usual kind.
He doesn't want to go at all. He's stuffed himself.
Following horses and donkeys, the occupiers are now actively enlisting sheep and rams into their ranks. It's worth noting that the Russian Ministry of Defense at least gives animals bulletproof vests, which for many contract soldiers is an unaffordable luxury. However, even so, the animals, unlike the Russians, refuse to willingly go to slaughter.
Come on, go. They're waiting for you there. All right, go on, slowly now. Come on. A combat unit.
The Russian army is so short on soldiers that they're putting not only sheep under arms, but circus performers too. And
I had it all carefully planned out so that I was, at first, originally an acrobat performing in the circus, but after experiencing some very bad and unfortunate falls, I ended my career as an acrobat and was eventually mobilized.
The disabled man turned out to be of no use to anyone at the circus, but he was perfect for the local assaults. By the way, the acrobat was given a partner and a command to match.
It turns out that there was me, an acrobat, a teacher of life safety and knowledge society, altar boy and car mechanic, and that's the kind of team we probably lived with.
And all of this, according to Putin, is the world's second strongest army. Although what is there to be surprised about with circus performers and sheep at the front when even Russian generals treat their own soldiers like cattle, selling and trading them literally by weight?
You see, the Ministry of Defense recruits people, gives them dog tags and weapons, and then it turns out that they don't exist. So selling them, what's the problem? They never existed and still don't.
On the Zaporizhzhia front, commanders openly sell their refuseniks into forced labor to collaborators. Instead of officially processing refusals or sending those unwilling to participate in local assaults to disciplinary units, they are listed as missing, detained, and handed over for unpaid. Forced labor throughout the Zaporizhzhia region. For this, commanders receive considerable sums of money from the collaborators. Such Russian refuseniks are now being found en masse at factories and construction sites in Melitopol and Berdyansk.
They're not even cannon fodder. They're not even serfs. They're just, I don't know, like people selling chicks at the market. And even then, honestly, people tend to feel more sympathy for the chicks.
Shock, Putin's tank army is falling apart at the seams. Colossal losses. More than 11,000 tanks are already resting in the scrap metal graveyard. The Kremlin is drowning in despair. Even the once advanced Uralvagonzavod is sinking into chaos and layoffs. Production is collapsing, assembly lines are coming to a halt. Russia's tank potential has evaporated, as if it never existed at all. We will show how the legend of Putin's great armored vehicles has collapsed. Watch until the end.
We must not only keep pace with the global economy, but strive to outpace its dynamics by unlocking our own potential.
But in Russia, there is neither dynamism nor potential to be seen. In particular, even the most resilient are starting to go under. Such is the case with the Russian military giant Uralvagonzavod, which produces armored vehicles and enjoys all the privileges of the military-industrial complex, can't cope and...
The space is so full that it can barely hold anything else, with every corner packed tightly and no room left to spare. People and objects are squeezed together, making it difficult to move around. The pressure is so intense that it feels as if the walls might burst open at any moment, perfectly capturing the idea of being completely overwhelmed and bursting at the seams. According to the latest statistics, about 250,000 people have been working like this in Russia recently.
And even reducing shifts to a minimum no longer works. Layoffs are looming at the enterprise that is the flagship of Russian tank manufacturing. This was reported by the Russian publication E1. In some departments, up to 50% of the staff is planned to be cut. And on the scale of the entire enterprise, without work will be left every 10th employee.
Previously, it was kind of like this. Civilian production might not have been very profitable, but there was a lot of money for military production, and that somehow made up for it. But now it seems even spending on military products is being cut. And it seems that Uralvagon's profits from military contracts can't cover the losses in the civilian sector. That's why now they're going to lay off people in the civilian production sector, reportedly by about 10%.
Experts explain that the reason for all this is the dramatic decline of the Russian economy. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, which are depriving Russia of millions in petrodollars, Western sanctions, and increased pressure from the US on the Russian oil industry have already led to a situation where even the negative forecasts for the economy are too optimistic. It will get even worse.
Their negative forecast from the central bank, let me remind you, is a 2.5 to 3.5% drop in GDP, 12% inflation, and a 20% interest rate. In other words, they will have to raise the rate back up to 20% next year. And that's their negative forecast. A scenario that I don't consider negative, but rather what is actually happening right now. That's the thing. The accumulated problems are just coming up every single day. And they don't allow the central bank to maintain the scenario it considers manageable.
The situation has escalated to the point where the economic decline in Russia is now being publicly acknowledged.
Question. Is that enough? Is this what we wanted?
In fact, even according to official data, the recession has already affected 19 out of 24 sectors of the Russian economy. Moreover, they're even starting to have problems with defense industry enterprises. If these enterprises are already experiencing non-payments, not getting paid from the budget, and the work week is being reduced. Like, for example, Uralvagonzavod. This means their funding was cut, well, about 3 months ago. So these processes are really happening.
At the same time, the funniest thing is that in Russia, they've already figured out how to present this information to the higher-ups. It's all in the spirit of negative growth and unsuccessful successes. So now, they're openly talking about the economic decline. At the same time, they add that there was such an unprecedented boom before, it simply couldn't last forever. So now we're seeing a decline.
That's their strategy. To say, no, there's no recession, no economic decline, and then release a statement that, yes, most likely there will be an economic downturn in the fourth quarter, and surround it all with a bunch of caveats.
The solution suggested itself once again to revise the draft budget, naturally in the direction of negative growth.
We are holding a whole series of meetings on the framework of the country's main financial document, its primary priority.
And as before, the priority remains the war. So analysts are not advising to expect any improvements. And if the cuts have already affected the industrial giants of the military-industrial complex, then all enterprises in the country, including private ones, are next in line.
A catastrophe for Russia's oil industry. The armed forces of Ukraine have set a record for strikes on oil refining facilities. The year 2025 has become a real hell for the Russian economy. Dozens of oil refineries are on fire. Drivers all over Russia are already feeling the consequences. There's almost no fuel and prices are sky high. Panic is growing, and this is just the beginning. Drone attacks are intensifying. It will only get louder and even more painful. You can find the details in our report.
The Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on Russian oil refineries are setting new records in both range and frequency. We are striking at a self-appointed target. We are striking precisely at the legitimate target. Oil extraction and refining make up 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are dirty oil rubles, which the enemy uses to kill us. If we look at the statistics for September and October of this year, that's 20 facilities. Among them are 6 oil refineries and 2 oil terminals, 3 oil depots and 9 oil pumping stations. As of early November 2025, Ukraine had carried out 111 strikes on oil depots and refineries in Russia. For comparison, there were 94 such incidents in all of 2024. As a result, the Russian Federation is facing enormous problems with oil refining volumes, as well as shortages of fuel and gasoline on the domestic market. What did this lead to? This resulted in a 20% shortage of petroleum products on the domestic market and the idling of 37% of oil refining capacity, as well as fuel shortages in 57 regions of the Russian Federation and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
The Federal Highway M12, Moscow to Kazan. A toll road. There's only one gas station every 150 kilometers. At each gas station, there are lines of cars stretching 1.5 to 2 kilometers just to fill up. I'll show you what this looks like now, and when it will be refueled in winter is anyone's guess. I counted 130 cars ahead of us.
But it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. The range of strikes on Russian oil refineries has almost doubled. If last year the farthest target was the Salavat refinery in Bashkortostan, about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, on October 6, 2025, Ukrainian drones reached the Putin'S refinery, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. According to calculations by journalists from the publication Vertka, the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes is 85%. Out of 250 strikes since the start of the full-scale war, 213 have been successful. Many facilities, especially in southern Russia, are attacked repeatedly. For example, the Ryazan, Volgograd and Ilsky refineries have each been attacked 10 times. In order to somehow put this war into a stalemate, to shift it, It is necessary to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary, and I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system. During the course of the war, Ukraine first launched from scratch and then significantly ramped up the production of long-range and rocket drones. Russian oil refineries are being terrorized by UAVs such as Lyuty, Polyanitsia, Peklo, and FP1. Drones costing just a few $1,000s are causing damage to the Russian budget amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. Look guys, if you take a closer look, that's actually the 7th hit that's burning right now, just as we expected. Whoa, can you see it? That's the 7th drone that just arrived. At the same time, following the drones, Ukraine is also ramping up the production of long-range missiles. According to experts, if Ukraine uses cruise missiles like the Flamingo with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, there will be nothing left of the Russian oil refineries.
If the strike hits the oil refinery, it will be impossible to restore that refinery. That is, it will be completely, if before it was possible to, when a drone hits, you can replace the damaged parts with spares in a few weeks or a month. But here, everything will be destroyed to the ground. The entire distillation column will be completely wiped out. And with just 2 pairs of such missiles, all that will remain of the refinery will be memories.
The trend is that there will be more and more strikes in the future. And gasoline and other fuels in Russia are becoming scarcer.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.